I was looking at the calendar on the way into the studio today, and I realized we are right on the precipice of that seasonal shift. You know, the
Ah,
one
yeah. The days start getting longer, the air changes.
exactly. And suddenly everybody is talking about spring.
It's inevitable. I mean, it's the season of the great waking up.
Right. And culturally, we have this very specific narrative about it. Spring is loud. It's aggressive.
100%.
It's this explosion of color and life,
Sure.
flowers popping and grass growing and baby animals everywhere. It's framed as this sudden, almost violent burst of energy.
Sudden appearance. That is usually exactly how we treat it. One day it's winter, and the next day, boom, everything is blooming.
Yeah, but I've been sitting with the source material for today's deep dive, and I have to say it has completely dismantled that view for me.
It really flips it on its head.
It does. We are looking at a really thoughtful piece titled Before the Bloom,
And this comes from an episode of the Artist Journal podcast by Northwind Illustration.
which is such a great source.
It really is. And for those of you who follow our deep dives regularly, we love sources that take a creative concept and apply it to a broader life strategy.
Absolutely. And just a quick aside for you listening, if you enjoy the themes we cover today, the source material actually comes from a broader archive. Northwind Illustration has a Substack channel where they post these reflective pieces regularly, so definitely go check that out if you want to see the original context.
Oh, yeah. Highly recommend it. But getting back to the specific episode, it challenges that whole explosion narrative we just talked about.
Right.
The central thesis is that spring isn't actually where things begin. The author argues that spring is simply where decisions become visible.
Where decisions become visible. I want to just pause on that immediately because it completely changes the timeline of success.
It really does.
It implies that the bloom, the launch or the finished product or that viral moment is actually just the final 1% of the process. The real work happened in the dark.
Exactly. It shifts the focus entirely from the event to the preparation. And today we're going to unpack exactly what that preparation looks like.
We're going to get into the weeds here.
We really are. We're going to talk about the difference between drawing a subject and building a body of work. And we're going to discuss a concept that I actually found really challenging.
Oh, the archive.
Yes, the idea that you should sometimes hide your best work in an archive for years before showing it to anyone.
Which sounds agonizing for anyone living in the modern content conveyor belt era.
Totally.
But before we get to the philosophy, we need to ground this. The source material doesn't start with abstract theory. It starts with a very specific, very quiet moment in 2019.
Right. It takes us to a park in Burnaby, British Columbia.
And the setting is crucial here. The author makes a point of saying this wasn't a dramatic day. There was no storm or golden hour lighting or cinematic backdrop.
Just a normal day.
Yeah, it was just open space, gentle air, and a very average afternoon.
It's the kind of day you would usually completely forget. But in the middle of this nondescript park, the artist spots a subject, a seagull.
Now, I have to admit, when I read Seagull, I laughed a little bit.
Because it's not exactly majestic.
No. Usually when we talk about artistic muse, we're talking about eagles or wolves or wild horses. Seagulls are, well, they're the pigeons of the sea.
Scavengers.
Exactly. They're usually screaming over a French fry in a parking lot.
That is the stereotype for sure. But that is what makes this observation so important. The artist wasn't looking at the species, they were looking at the movement.
Right.
The source breaks down exactly why this specific bird caught their eye, and it had absolutely nothing to do with feathers or beaks.
It was entirely about how it carried itself. The text uses 3 specific descriptors that really paint a picture. First, the bird wasn't hurried.
Second, it wasn't cautious.
And third, and this is the heavy hitter here, it wasn't looking for approval.
Not looking for approval.
It's fascinating how we project these human traits onto animals, but it works so perfectly here.
Because we are so used to seeing animals that are either skittish and running away or performing like a dog begging for a treat.
But this bird, the source, says it walked with quiet authority. It acted as if the ground already belonged to it.
That phrase, quiet authority, is going to be the anchor for everything we discuss today.
Definitely.
The bird wasn't fighting for space, it just occupied it. So seeing this, the artist takes out a pen and paper, keeping in mind this is back in 2019, and captures a quick sketch.
And here is where the disconnect happens. At the time, the artist thought they were capturing a specific set of feelings. They actually list them out. Joy, discovery, freedom.
Which makes total sense. You are in a park, the air is nice, there's a bird walking freely. Freedom is the obvious surface level association.
It's the cliche association.
Yeah.
And the artist admits later that they were wrong, or at least incomplete.
They didn't actually understand what they had drawn yet.
No, they didn't. They thought it was about the freedom to go anywhere. But looking back, years later, they realized it wasn't about freedom at all. It was about posture.
Let's really drill down on that distinction because it's subtle but vital. Freedom versus posture. Freedom is usually interpreted as external, like I can fly away or I can escape. But posture is internal. The source describes it as the posture of something that knows where it stands.
That is such a profound shift in perspective.
Yeah.
Freedom is I can leave. Posture is I am here and I'm supposed to be here.
Exactly. And you can't always see that distinction in the moment of creation. In 2019, the artist was just too close to the work. They were just reacting to the environment. They hadn't let the idea mature yet.
So they have this sketch, and this brings us to the archive concept. Now, if this were me, or probably 90% of the people listening to this, the next step is obvious.
You scan it.
You scan the drawing, you post it on Instagram, you tag it Spring Vibes, you get your likes, and you move on to the next thing.
The endless dopamine loop.
Right. But the artist did not do that. They put the sketch in the archive. The source explicitly says it wasn't released, it wasn't refined, it wasn't placed onto any surface. It just sat in the dark for years.
To a modern productivity guru, that sounds like failure. It sounds like wasted inventory.
Yeah, like you're leaving money on the table.
Exactly. But the source introduces a concept here called the philosophy of bloom. The line that really struck me was, not every drawing is meant to bloom the moment it is made.
That goes against the grain of everything we are taught right now. We are obsessed with speed to market, minimum viable product, ship it, don't overthink it.
We really are. But the argument here is that ideas like wine or like nature itself require fermentation. They need a different season. By putting the sketch away, the artist wasn't abandoning it. They were letting the meaning catch up to the image.
Letting the meaning catch up. That is a really useful way to think about writer's block or creative stalls.
How so?
Well, maybe the block isn't a lack of skill. Maybe it's just a lack of distance.
Precisely. If they had released that drawing in 2019, they would have sold it as a picture of a happy bird. And it would have been fine.
But shall
Yes, very shallow. By waiting, the artist changed. The world changed. And when they finally went back to the archive, they didn't see joy anymore. They saw positioning. They saw direction.
So the archive isn't a graveyard for dead ideas. It's a maturing chamber.
It's a cellar. It's where you put things that aren't ready to be consumed yet.
Okay, so let's fast forward. The artist returns to the work after this long pause. They pull the sketch out of the dark. Now, my instinct, and I think the instinct of most creatives, would be to say, okay, I am a better artist now than I was 3 years ago. Let me redraw this.
Let me fix the anatomy. Let me make it perfect.
Exactly.
And that is exactly what the source forbids. They have a very specific rule here. Do not redraw the work.
That seems so counterintuitive. Why keep the worst version?
Because the original sketch contains the energy of the observation. That moment in Burnaby, the specific way the pen hit the paper while watching the bird that is Data. If you try to redraw it in the studio 3 years later, you are simulating the moment, not capturing it. You lose the spark.
So you were basically correcting the life out of it.
Exactly. So instead of redrawing, the method is refinement. And this is where the source gets really technical in a way I absolutely love. They distinguish between two types of decisions: decorative decisions and directional decisions.
I want to spend some real time here because this applies to so much more than just drawing. This could apply to editing audio or writing a report or building a house. Decorative versus directional. How do you define the difference?
Think of it like this. A decorative decision is about aesthetics. It is about pleasing the eye. It's adding shading because you are showing off your shading skills. It's adding a background because the white space makes you nervous.
It's icing.
Right, it's icing. You are trying to make it look better or more finished in a very superficial way.
Okay, so decoration is almost vanity. It's adding noise to make sure people know you worked hard on it.
Often, yes. But a directional decision is about clarity. The artist asks, what is the truth of this image? The truth is the posture, that quiet authority we talked about. So a directional decision might be to erase a stray line that distracts from the bird's stance, or to add a single spot of color to guide the eye directly to the head.
So every move is a signpost.
Yes. A directional decision points the viewer toward the core idea. It's not about making it pretty. It is about making it undeniable.
That is a massive shift in mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You aren't asking, does this look good? You are asking, does this tell the truth?
And that shift from trying to make something pretty to trying to make something clear is the exact moment the artist stops drawing and starts building.
Which is the next big concept in the source material, the distinction between drawing and building. At first glance, these sound like synonyms in the creative world, but the author draws a really hard line between them.
It's a structural distinction. The source says drawing captures a moment. Building shapes a body of work.
Shapes a body of work. That sounds architectural. It implies weight.
It does. When you are just drawing, you are completely focused on the page in front of you. You are thinking, I hope I get the beak right. It is an isolated act. But when you are building, you zoom out. You stop thinking about the notebook and start thinking about surfaces. You start thinking about space.
The source lists some examples here that are really evocative. They ask, how does this image sit in space? How does it hold a wall? How does it repeat a crayon fabric?
That transition to fabric and walls is key. It implies that the artwork is no longer just a window you look into like a picture in a frame. It is becoming an object that lives in the physical world. It interacts with the environment.
They mention rhythm, too, how it carries rhythm into a room. That is such an interesting way to think about a static image.
Well, think about that seagull again, that quiet authority. If you just sketch it in a book, it stays in the book. But if you refine it, vector it, and turn it into a repeating pattern on a textile, suddenly you are injecting that unhurried authority into a physical space. A person wearing that fabric or sitting in a room with that wallpaper actually feels that rhythm.
So the drawing becomes a tool, a raw material.
Yes. The source calls the drawing a starting point for scale. It can be singular framed and quiet. Or it can fragment. It can become a pattern. It can travel.
It can travel. I love that phrasing. It implies the art has a passport. It's not stuck in the sketchbook anymore. It's going places the artist might not even go.
And this brings us all the way back to the start. It only travels well because it was allowed to mature. If the artist had rushed it out in 2019 as a joyful bird, it wouldn't have had the structural integrity to hold a wall. It would have just been a doodle. By waiting, by refining it with those directional decisions, it became a building block.
It really seems like the artist has undergone a pretty massive shift in how they view their own output. They aren't just a creator anymore. They are a curator. They are a strategist.
Which brings us back to the definition of spring. If spring isn't about the explosion of flowers, if it isn't about frantic production, what is it?
The source gives us a totally new definition. It is about deciding which work carries forward.
That is such a strategy-minded definition of a season. It's not about newness, it's about selection. It's about looking at the winter's work and saying, this one stays and this one goes.
It feels infinitely more intentional. The bird in 2019 symbolized observation. Today, the source says it represents positioning.
I am interested in structure, in clarity, in knowing which pieces travel well. That is the voice of an expert, someone who has moved past the initial excitement of, I made a thing, and is now asking, does this thing have legs? Does it have ground?
And that brings us full circle to the seagull in the park.
The bird that wasn't running.
The bird that wasn't asking for permission.
The bird that moved as if the ground already belonged to it.
The artist concludes that this is the true definition of string, not the noise,
Yeah.
not the color,
Yeah.
but the quiet confidence of something stepping forward knowing it has found its ground.
It redefines blooming completely. We usually think of blooming as something passive, it happens to the flower because the sun came out. But this view says no. Blooming is an active decision. You decide to bloom because you are ready, because you've done the work in the dark.
It takes the pressure off, doesn't it? We usually feel this anxiety in spring or really anytime we start a new project to launch immediately. To be loud, to be visible, to scream, look at me.
To prove we exist.
Right. But this source is saying relax. Real growth is about that quiet confidence. It's about having done the refinement, having made the directional decisions, and then stepping forward only when you know exactly where you stand.
It's the difference between a firework and a lighthouse. One is loud and bright and gone in a second. The other stands firm and gives direction. We should all aspire to build lighthouses, not just launch fireworks.
That is a beautiful image. So for you listening out there who's sitting there thinking, okay, this is philosophically sound, but I am not an illustrator. I don't draw seagulls in Burnaby. How do we translate this to the boardroom or the classroom or just daily life?
I think the translation is universal. It's about the value of the pause. In a world that is completely obsessed with instant output, social media, quarterly reports, fast fashion, there is immense competitive advantage in letting your ideas sit.
Putting them in the wine cellar, so to speak.
Exactly. Don't be afraid to put a project in the drawer. Let it mature. Let yourself mature. Maybe the business idea you had 3 years ago wasn't bad, it was just early. You didn't have the posture to carry it yet.
And now maybe you do. Maybe you've learned enough to see it differently.
Maybe. And when you do revisit it, remember the rule. Don't just redo it, refine it. Ask yourself, what is the directional decision here? What is the core truth I'm trying to get across? And how do I remove everything that isn't that?
It's about moving from drawing, just capturing the chaos of the moment, to building, creating something with structure that can actually live in the world.
And something that can travel well, that's the goal. Creating work, whether it's a policy, a product, or a piece of art that doesn't need you standing next to it to explain it, it has its own authority.
It's funny, I am mentally scanning my own hard drive right now. I have so many half-finished drafts and half-baked schemes. I usually look at that folder with a lot of guilt. Like, look at all this stuff, I quit.
But maybe you didn't quit. Maybe you were just archiving.
That is a much kinder way to look at it. They aren't failures, they're just waiting for their season.
And waiting for you to understand what they are actually about. Because you might think that draft is about anger, but in 3 years you might realize it's actually about boundaries. And that's a totally different piece of work. That's a directional shift.
Knowing it has found its ground. That's the phrase I am taking with me today. It's not about finding new ground. It's about knowing the ground you're already on.
It's a powerful image. It turns patience into a power move rather than just waiting around.
Patience is a power move.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
We have covered a lot of territory today. From a simple walk at a park in Burnaby to a complete reevaluation of how we handle our work, our patience, and our decisions.
It's amazing what you can learn from a seagull if you actually stop to look at how it moves.
And if you wait a few years to really think about it.
Time is the essential ingredient. You can't hack the timeline.
So we want to leave you with a challenge. A little something to mull over as you go about your week.
We all have an archive. It might be a physical sketchbook, a digital folder, or just a mental list of someday projects.
So the question is, what ideas or projects are currently sitting in your own archive right now that you've been ignoring because you think they're dead?
And are you rushing to force other things to bloom before they are ready? Or, and here is the hard part, are you willing to wait until they find their posture?
When you look at your work, are you making decorative decisions to make it look nice or directional decisions to make it stand firm?
Think about that difference. Think about the difference between drawing a moment and building a body of work.
And maybe take a walk in the park and watch how the birds move. You might see something completely different than what you expect.
You might see a decision becoming visible.
I love that. That's a wrap for this deep dive into Before the Bloom from the Artist Journal podcast. Thank you for listening, and thank you for exploring these ideas with us.
It's been a pleasure. Keep building.
We'll catch you on the next one.